My neighbor keeps leaving her kids in my yard and expects me to babysit her kids every day because I work from home, so I called CPS. She was shocked at what I did when they arrived. Hi, my name's Jessica, I'm 34 years old, and I live in a quiet, tree-lined suburb just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. I work remotely as a data analyst for a mid-sized tech company, and after nearly a decade of living frugally, saving carefully, and saying no to almost every whim, I finally bought my first home last year. It is a modest two-bedroom ranch with a little fenced-in backyard, the kind of place that feels like a sanctuary. I take a lot of pride in it. I have no kids, by choice, and I truly enjoy my space and my peace, especially since working from home means I spend nearly every hour here. I moved in last August and kept to myself for the most part. I nodded at neighbors, exchanged the occasional polite smile at the mailbox, and took weekend walks around the block. That's how I first noticed Dana. She lives in the house directly next to mine, a slightly run-down rental with a creaky porch and a half-broken tricycle always tipped over near the steps. Dana is 29, a single mom with 2 kids, Lucas, who is 6, and Mia, who is 3. I never really spoke to her beyond surface-level greetings. I gathered from neighborhood chatter and bits I overheard that she worked odd jobs, sometimes overnight shifts, sometimes deliveries. I did not pry. Her life was her own. And honestly, I was just grateful my side of the fence was quiet. But then it started. At first, it was harmless. One Saturday afternoon, Dana knocked on my door and asked if the kids could play in my yard for a bit while she ran to the grocery store. She looked frazzled, hair tied up in a loose bun, one shoe half on, and Mia squirming in her arms. I said yes. I did not think much of it. I had no weekend calls, the weather was pleasant, and the kids stayed out there for maybe 30 minutes, running around and throwing leaves in the air. Dana returned with a couple of grocery bags, thanked me, and that was that. But then it happened again the next weekend. And the next. And then on a weekday. I would be mid-Zoom call, laser-focused on analytics reports or client data, and I would hear shouting outside. At first, I assumed it was neighborhood noise, but when it became consistent, I checked. Lucas and Mia were in my yard. No knock. No text beforehand. Just, there. One time I opened the back door and asked Lucas where his mom was. He shrugged and said she went to get something real quick. I checked my phone and saw a message from Dana, sent about 20 minutes prior. Hey, just dropped the kids in your yard for a bit, be back soon. It became routine. Almost daily. Sometimes she texted. Sometimes not. The kids would just appear. I work 8 to 9 hours a day from home, often with back-to-back calls and deadlines. My job requires deep focus. The kind of focus that gets completely shattered when a toddler starts crying outside or when a 6-year-old launches a basketball into your rose bush. I tried to be kind. I tried to be patient. I reminded myself that parenting is hard, that being a single mom is exhausting, that maybe she did not have help. So I pulled her aside one afternoon and told her, as gently as I could, that I was not comfortable with this arrangement. I explained that while I was sympathetic to her situation, I was not a babysitter. I had a full-time job, one that paid for this house and the yard her kids were using. I told her it was becoming distracting, that I could not be responsible for them, that they were too young to be unsupervised. Dana did not take it well. She waved it off, saying it was just an hour, and that, you're home anyway. She smiled like it was a compliment and said, you're so good with them. I told her, again, that I was not watching them, I was working, but she kept brushing off every concern like I was just being difficult. I started to feel uneasy. I installed a Ring camera. I locked the backyard gate, only to find a day later that Lucas had climbed over it and let Mia in through the side. That time, I found them digging in my vegetable garden. Lucas had pulled up the little tomato plant I had been nurturing for weeks, and Mia had thrown dirt onto my back porch. Then it escalated. One afternoon, I came outside and found Mia climbing my fence. She was barefoot, trying to scale the wooden boards like it was a jungle gym. Lucas was nearby, crouched down with something shiny. When I got closer, I froze. He had found my garden shears. I had used them earlier in the day and left them near the bushes, forgetting to store them properly. He was jabbing them into the dirt, inches away from his own knee. That was it. My heart was pounding, not from anger but from fear. If he had hurt himself, really hurt himself, on my property, what then? Would I be held liable? Would Dana sue me? Would Child Protective Services think I was the one neglecting them? I started documenting everything. Every text Dana sent, every time the kids were dropped off, every video clip of them being in the yard alone. I took time-stamped photos. I made sure my home security camera was always on and facing the backyard. I kept a log of when she left them, when she picked them up, and any dangerous behavior I observed. And then came the day that broke everything. It was a Wednesday. I had a huge presentation that morning, one I had been prepping for all week. My nerves were already frayed. I got up early, dressed up a little even though no one would see me, and made sure my space was quiet, clean, and distraction-free. About an hour into my call, I heard loud crying. Not whining, screaming. I muted myself, got up, and looked outside. Mia was sitting in the mud near the garden, soaked and wailing. Lucas was on the porch step, holding his knee and crying quietly, blood running down his shin. I ran outside. Mia had apparently fallen face-first into the flower bed. Lucas had tripped on the edge of the porch and scraped his knee hard enough that it was bleeding through his pants. I checked for Dana. No sign of her. No text. Nothing. I cleaned them up as best I could and brought them both inside just so I could keep them warm and contained while I tried calling Dana. No answer. I left a voicemail. Then another. 4 hours later, she finally texted, "On my way. Sorry, got caught up." That night, I filed the report with Child Protective Services. I was not looking to ruin someone's life. But I could not take the risk anymore. This was not just inconsiderate. It was neglect. I gave them all the documentation. The texts. The photos. The videos. I made it clear that I was not trying to take custody, I just wanted them to know what was happening. What was being ignored? What was being forced on me without consent? 2 days later, they showed up. I was working when I saw their car pull into Dana's driveway. I did not eavesdrop, but I saw her come outside, arms folded, expression unreadable. She spoke to them for a while. I saw one of the agents kneel down to talk to the kids. They stayed for nearly an hour. When they finally left, I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. But the peace did not last long. Maybe 10 minutes later, Dana stormed into my yard like a tornado. She was furious, red-faced, shouting. She screamed at me, called me a traitor, a bitter, childless woman who did not understand how hard it is. She told me I had no heart, that I was selfish, that neighbors are supposed to help each other. She threw every insult she could manage, circling around the same theme. I was the villain because I had not accepted the unspoken duty she had tried to dump on me. I stood there, listening to her rant, until she finally paused for breath. I told her, calmly, deliberately, that what she was doing was not just inappropriate, it was dangerous. I said I would not be an accomplice to her neglect, not by silence, and certainly not by passive participation. I told her I was sorry it came to this, but she had pushed every boundary and ignored every warning. She didn't respond, just stormed off. It's been a week. 7 quiet, oddly tense days since Child Protective Services pulled into Dana's driveway and set off a chain of events that none of us saw coming, but some of us clearly suspected were inevitable. She hasn't spoken to me since. Not a text, not a glare, not a single shouted insult from across the fence. At first, I assumed it was the silence of someone regrouping, planning her next manipulative move. But it turns out, silence had a far more devastating reason behind it. I found out the full story from Karen, the neighborhood's unofficial communications director. She's in her late 60s, keeps binoculars on her windowsill for bird watching, and has a talent for accidentally knowing everyone's business. Normally, I avoid her like the HOA newsletter, but when she waved me down at my mailbox, I stopped. I had a feeling I needed to hear what she had to say. She didn't waste time. She told me CPS had returned to Dana's house just 2 days after their initial visit. It was supposed to be a routine follow-up, the kind where they check in, make sure the home is safe, ensure the parent understands the severity of the warning. Except when they knocked on the door, no one answered. The house was locked from the outside. But they could hear noise inside, children's voices, cartoons playing at high volume. Eventually, with law enforcement assistance, they gained entry. Dana wasn't home. In fact, she hadn't been home since the previous night. She had apparently gone to a friend's place, possibly a new boyfriend's from what Karen heard, and left Lucas and Mia alone with a tablet, some snacks, and a locked front door. That was all. No adult. No check-ins. No contact. Just two small children, unattended, fending for themselves for at least 14 hours. The CPS report called it egregious neglect. The kids were temporarily removed that same afternoon and placed in emergency foster care pending further investigation. When I heard that, I stood there, mail forgotten in my hand, staring at Karen like she had just told me a tornado had hit our street. I won't lie, I felt awful. Not because I had reported Dana, not for a single second. But because Lucas and Mia didn't deserve that. They deserved better. Lucas, who had once shown me a rock he thought looked like a dinosaur tooth. Mia, who ran in circles every time she saw butterflies in my garden, shrieking with joy. They were sweet kids, chaotic, unsupervised, and starved for attention, but they weren't the problem. They were symptoms of it. And then Karen dropped the second bomb. Apparently, Dana had not only been telling people that I had offered to watch her children, but that I had volunteered because I was desperate for kids, and jealous of her life. She told anyone who would listen that I was lonely, bitter, and sabotaged her out of envy. That I had gone behind her back to hurt her for attention. That she was blindsided. That I was cruel. I was stunned. Not because I expected honesty from her, but because I didn't realize how deeply she would twist the narrative. Karen said the story had made its way to nearly every house within shouting distance. And while some neighbors apparently bought into it at first, especially the ones who only saw two sides, the mother and the snitch, it didn't hold up under scrutiny. Because, as it turns out, I wasn't the first neighbor Dana had taken advantage of. Janet, a quiet widow who lives 3 houses down, spoke up next. She told Karen that last year Dana used to send the kids into her yard constantly. They would show up with no warning, no shoes, and no supervision. Janet would come outside and find them splashing in her bird bath or pulling flowers out of her rose garden. At first, she tolerated it. She even offered juice boxes and chalk. But then it became daily, then expected, and then demanding. When Janet finally told Dana it had to stop, Dana accused her of being unfriendly, of hating children, of having too much free time to understand a working mother's struggle. Janet put up a no trespassing sign the next day and installed motion sensors. Dana retaliated by letting the kids play loudly in front of her house every evening for a week straight. And it didn't stop with Janet. According to Karen, Dana had a pattern. She would target the most accessible woman on the block, especially if that woman lived alone, and gradually escalate the asks. First it was, just for a few minutes, then, just while I run an errand, then, you're home anyway. If the neighbor allowed it, she'd push further. If the neighbor resisted, she'd guilt them. And if the neighbor finally said no, that's when the character assassination would begin. Suddenly that neighbor was heartless, mean-spirited, jealous, or prejudiced. Dana's stories adapted to whatever narrative she needed to preserve her own image as the struggling, innocent mother doing her best. The problem was, none of the other women took it as far as I did. They complained to friends. They gossiped. They drew boundaries. But they didn't file reports. They didn't collect proof. They didn't document timestamps and screenshots and video clips. They didn't press back with actual action. That was the difference. And once word got out about what had actually happened, once CPS removed the children and the real story started unraveling, Dana's version of events began to collapse. The sympathy she tried to harvest started to rot in the open. I started noticing a shift. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact were now giving me tight, understanding nods. Janet brought over a small potted succulent and said it was just something to brighten up your kitchen. Karen left a handwritten note in my mailbox that said, "We see you. And thank you." I didn't do any of it for gratitude, but I won't pretend it didn't feel good to know I wasn't alone anymore. The last I heard, Dana was being investigated not just for neglect, but for prior incidents that were never formally reported. There were whispers that the children might stay in care longer than expected, and that Dana's rental agreement was on shaky ground due to complaints filed by multiple neighbors. She has become a ghost on our street. The porch is silent. The tricycle hasn't moved. The blinds are always closed. No shouting. No running. Just a stillness that's as eerie as it is revealing. And as for me, I sleep better. I work without interruptions. I walk into my backyard and don't brace myself for chaos. But more than that, I feel like I stood up not just for myself, but for everyone she tried to manipulate into submission. I didn't just say no, I acted. A couple of days after the neighborhood started catching wind of what actually happened with Dana, after the silence lifted and people finally started seeing the truth, I began noticing strange things. The first was my mailbox. I opened it to find the mail inside soaked, stained, and dripping with ketchup. Not splashed, not accidentally spilled, but deliberately poured in with purpose. The next morning, I walked out to my car and found peanut butter smeared in wide, greasy arcs across my windshield. Chunky. As if it had been scooped out by hand and slathered on like some deranged toddler art project. I stood there in my driveway for a full minute, staring at it, because what else was I supposed to do? There were no cameras pointed directly at the street. No fingerprints. No witnesses. But I didn't need proof to know. It was Dana. It had her desperation written all over it. She had lost control of the story, lost the support she thought she'd had, and she couldn't cope with the reality that her victim mask had slipped. So instead of facing the consequences, she did what bullies do when exposed, she retaliated with pettiness and chaos, hoping to scare me back into silence. But I wasn't that easy to shake. Then came the notice from the HOA. An official envelope, taped to my door, stating that a complaint had been filed against me. The wording was surreal. I was accused of operating an unlicensed daycare out of my home and disturbing the peace and comfort of the neighborhood. Dana had reported me. She claimed I had been charging for childcare, had multiple children on my property unsupervised, and had been causing excessive noise that disrupted the community. I sat down at my desk, stunned. I read it again. And again. Then I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from the absurdity of being dragged into the upside down by someone who should be the one answering to every authority in town. I didn't panic. I pulled up every text Dana had ever sent me. I compiled every video clip from my camera, including the ones that showed her dropping the kids off without warning, the timestamps that coincided with my work schedule, the moments where I physically told the children to stay off the porch while I worked. I printed screenshots of her messages saying things like, "Be back soon," or, "They're just in the yard for a bit." I created a folder labeled HOA Complaint Rebuttal and handed it over at the next board meeting. They were not pleased. The board president called me the next morning. Apparently, the entire board had reviewed the materials. Not only did they agree that I was clearly not running a daycare, but they were furious that someone tried to weaponize the HOA complaint system in the middle of an active CPS case. They asked if I wanted to pursue anything further. I told them not yet. But that changed quickly. 3 nights later, my doorbell camera caught Dana sneaking up to my front porch just after 1 a.m. She was wearing a hoodie, and carrying something that glistened under the camera's infrared lens. She stopped at my welcome mat, bent down, and poured. A sticky, syrupy sludge, looked like honey or maybe corn syrup. Then she turned and sprinted back across the lawn. I checked the footage. It was clear. Face visible. Action undeniable. And because I had already reported the previous mailbox and windshield incidents to the HOA and noted my suspicions, this time I forwarded everything directly to them, and to the police. The officer who took my report confirmed it qualified as property damage. Even if it wasn't major vandalism, it was still targeted, deliberate, and repeated. I told them I didn't want to press charges, but I wanted it documented. Thoroughly. I made sure they included her full name, her involvement in a CPS case, the false HOA complaint, and every petty act she had committed since the truth started spreading. By the time CPS followed up with their next visit, they had a much fuller picture. Dana is now officially banned from using any of our community resources. That includes the shared green spaces, the pool, the community center, and even access to HOA-sponsored events. The board cited her for harassment and malicious conduct pending resolution of her CPS case. Her name is flagged, and her property is on a monitoring list, which means any future complaints, about her or from her, are subject to review and investigation before they're accepted. According to Karen, Dana is also now under supervised check-ins with CPS and has been assigned mandatory parenting classes. I heard from another neighbor that she's also being evaluated for potential support services due to difficulty maintaining safe supervision. The phrasing made me angry, not because support services aren't needed, but because this situation never had to get this far. She had every opportunity to do the right thing. To ask for real help. To admit she couldn't handle it all alone. But instead, she used her kids like a pass, a shield, and then a weapon. And when it didn't work, she lashed out at the person who wouldn't play along. That person just happened to be me. I still think about Lucas and Mia. I wonder where they are, whether they're safe, whether someone is making them pancakes and telling them bedtime stories. I hope so. They deserve it. I never wanted them caught in the middle of this, but there comes a point where pretending not to see neglect becomes complicity. I wasn't going to stand by and do nothing while two innocent kids got left behind in the noise of their mother's denial. I don't celebrate what's happened. I don't brag. I don't relish her downfall. But I do stand by every choice I made. Because boundaries matter. Truth matters. And silence, comfortable as it might be, was never going to protect those children. I wish it hadn't come to this, but again those are her children, not mine. It's been 3 months since everything finally fell into place, since the noise, the drama, the stress, and the surprise vandalism stopped. 3 months since Dana screamed across our shared property line, since Child Protective Services took the kids, and since my name somehow ended up as both villain and whistleblower depending on who you asked. Life is quieter now. Quieter, but not without complexity. To my surprise, and according to Karen, to Dana's visible dismay, Lucas and Mia are back. After 2 months of mandated parenting classes, closely monitored home visits, supervised drop-offs at a certified daycare, and multiple compliance check-ins, Dana was granted conditional custody of her kids. CPS concluded that, under strict conditions, reunification was in the best interest of the children. There would be oversight, of course. Surprise home inspections, continued parenting education, regular reports from the daycare. But the kids went home. Home now being not her rental next door, but a small duplex in a nearby town where, according to Karen, she's living with her aunt. The aunt, older, retired, and known in her own neighborhood for running a tight ship, is now listed as the secondary guardian on CPS documentation. That means she's expected to cohabitate and be present at all times. Dana is not. It's not ideal, but it's something. And honestly, it's more support than Dana ever sought when she was using my backyard as a holding pen. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have mixed feelings. From a legal standpoint, Dana did everything she was told to do. She completed her classes, allowed the home visits, participated in her evaluations, and didn't miss a single supervised visit. On paper, she showed progress. And under the law, that's enough. But personal accountability isn't as simple as checking boxes. You can't measure remorse in paperwork. I don't know if she actually learned anything. I want to believe she did. I want to believe that staring down the barrel of losing her children permanently, seeing them placed in someone else's home and knowing it was her own negligence that did it, shook her into awareness. But a part of me doubts it. Because from everything I've seen, every boundary she broke, every line she twisted, every narrative she weaponized, Dana doesn't admit fault. She rewrites it. She never reached out to apologize. Not even once. Not a note. Not a knock. Not a text. And I'm fine with that. In fact, I prefer it. I didn't take the actions I did for closure. I did them for safety. Mine, and theirs. Since then, I've made changes. I reinforced the fence between our properties, built it higher, stronger, and more secure. It's tall enough now that even Lucas would struggle to climb it, even with a boost. I replaced the garden gate with a coded lock. I upgraded my camera system, added additional coverage points, motion sensors, and floodlights. My yard, once chaotic and unpredictable, is now back to being the peaceful oasis I'd spent nearly 10 years working to afford. No more toys tossed over the fence. No more juice boxes left under my hydrangeas. No more dirt tracks across the patio after rain. The silence isn't just satisfying, it's sacred. But every now and then, I find myself thinking about those kids. Lucas had this bright, sharp energy. He was curious, always moving, always exploring. He once told me he wanted to be a construction guy who also catches bugs. Mia was quieter, but her joy came in bursts, spinning when she saw butterflies, dancing in muddy puddles like they were stages made just for her. I don't miss the disruption. But I do miss the innocence they carried, the way they glowed when they felt safe enough to just be kids. I hope Dana really understands what that means now. Because her second chance is not infinite. One slip, one more documented failure, and the state won't be as forgiving. Reunification is a gift, not a reset button. The paperwork may say she earned it, but the real work starts now. Quiet nights. Early mornings. Stability. Discipline. Unrelenting presence. That's what parenting actually requires. And she doesn't get to outsource it anymore. As for me, I still live in the same house. I still work remotely. I still drink my morning coffee on the patio when the weather's good. The garden is thriving again. The tomatoes I thought were doomed are somehow rebounding. I even started building a butterfly garden in one corner, more for me than anything, though sometimes I catch myself hoping Mia has a new place to watch them, wherever she is. The neighborhood has stabilized. Karen's back to watching birds, Janet waves every time she walks by, and no one's car has had peanut butter on it since. It's a funny thing, seeing peace return after chaos. It doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel triumphant. It just feels earned. I'll never understand how Dana let things get so out of control. I'll never understand how someone could let pride and stubbornness outweigh the well-being of their own children. But I don't need to, because it's not my story to fix, not anymore. I can only hope she understands that her second chance wasn't given by me, or even by the state. It was given by two kids who still trust her, even after everything. And if she fails them again, I won't be silent, not for a second. But for now, she's someone else's responsibility. Not mine. Her story continues elsewhere. Mine continues here, behind a tall fence and under a calmer sky. With peace, routine, and some bittersweet reflection. I hope Dana is serious about her second chance.